Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, HOA takes veteran's handicapped parking spot, claims he doesn't need it. So, to start things off, I am a veteran living in a homeowner association. My HOA story starts like this. It was a bleak Tuesday afternoon when I drove home through thunder and rain to find my allocated parking space, conveniently situated beside my apartment block because of my disability, was now coned off with signs of demolition, works in progress. The only free spot was across the bay, and even on a clear day this would be a tough walk, making it much more difficult with the rain. What started as slow walk then ended in a crawl as I spent the next hour getting into my apartment, falling several times, collapsing in exhaustion afterwards and catching a cold. I spent the next few days in bed while curious and worried neighbors checked in on me and brought me groceries. With their help I recovered, but not soon enough to stop the roadworks as I stepped outside to notice a lane where my spot had been. When I questioned it with the HOA, they said they'd pass on my query to the president and get back to me soon. 10 days later I got another call with what feels like a prepared statement. Dear resident, we apologize for the inconvenience, but the parking slots at Rosewood Avenue have been reduced to make way for a new fire lane to ensure the safety of our residents in the event of fire. As such, please park in the other available slots from now on. Sincerely, HOA President. I felt betrayed. I felt angry. Did they seriously just remove the block's only disabled slot for the fire service? They could have changed any slots into that lane, or even added it round the back when it wasn't in anyone's way. I went about my day and headed to the community center for the Veterans Support Group to find most of the members sitting in the park outside instead. The doors were locked and a note posted said that the group was banned from further meetings due to noise complaints, signed by the HOA. First my parking spot, then banning our support group. Later on I heard in the news that they were giving fines to residents that displayed military and veteran support flags. This ranged from public meetings to their private driveways. Despite the consequences, a few of us got together to talk about the problems, remembering that the HOA recently elected a new president, Mrs. Mallory Smith, at the end of last month, who announced some striking changes. Whether they could be a helping hand or the source of the misfortune, I wrote them another letter directly to find out. 2 nights later I get a call from the president, which I was initially relieved for. Mrs. Smith went on to say that during her first month of tenure she was called on to make the town safer, which warranted the need to expand roads for emergency services. Despite listing off all the other odd and horrible things happening to the veterans around town, she assured me there was nothing to worry about and everything would be back to normal soon. 2 weeks later the restrictions seemed to tighten rather than ease up, so I decided to do a little more digging into her excuses, meeting a friend at the fire station that claimed he nor his team ever made such a request to the HOA and more roads were not necessary. He was sympathetic to my concerns and said he would call the HOA himself to chase them up on it. What came later was an angry phone call from Mrs. Smith and new fines in my mailbox marked as violation of public rights, which they explained was because I decided to look into the matter myself, and I was warned off doing so again. Initially I tried to keep the conversation calm, remaining calm despite the tense situation like my years in the field had trained me to do, but now I'd wish anything to be back in a battle than talk to anyone on the HOA anymore. With seemingly little to lose that they hadn't already taken, I decided to press the issue a little bit until she reluctantly and haphazardly admitted in anger that she had taken my parking space because she did not deem me disabled enough to need one. Mrs. Smith must have realized her mistake when the conversation halted. From my stunned silence, she quickly hung up the phone. When I arrived at the park the same evening for the support group, I found a pair of community police officers scattering a senior crowd, no doubt the work of the HOA trying to split us up again. Life started to feel like a resistance movement or covert operation, with the ruling body of the town against us and watching our every move. We met in secret and made our plans for a counterattack. With little chance of appealing to the HOA directly or clearing the outstanding fines, we decided to try and appeal for more public support on social media before we were overwhelmed with abuse or debt from the HOA, even if doing so would likely have other consequences. Overnight we went semi-viral, for small town standards, and were met with overwhelming support for our veterans as well as a lot of backlash against the local HOA and Mrs. Smith in particular, who quickly released their own statement to try and discredit us, saying that our claims are unjustified and that only unused parking spots were demolished for the fire lane. The next few days saw our little town split like a civil war between support for the veterans and support for the HOA. With neither side looking to back down, but as the fines and allegations continued to pile up against us, we had no choice but to take the matter to higher authorities. I filed a claim to sue the HOA for their mistreatment, citing the evidence we had previously collected from letters, phone calls and my friend at the fire service. The total of the lawsuit we were aiming for was what we had collectively received in fines from the HOA since their mistreatment began. It seemed only fair at the time they should get back what they give. On top of that, the costs of court were high, but the veterans pooled together to help pay the charges, and we even saw small donations from our supporters towards the cause as well. The process took months and a number of trials at court, pitting us, the underdog, against the big lawyers hired by the HOA in a similar to a David versus Goliath scenario. As time went on, my hope for victory dwindled, and in my darkness moments I considered rescinding the lawsuit to save myself the costs and the shame, but I pulled through by group support and the eagerness to see Mrs. Smith bitterly announce defeat. On its 8th week, the judge and jury were able to reach a unanimous verdict, siding with the veterans with a full payout. Mrs. Smith resigned from the HOA after a public apology to the harm she had caused the local veterans during her brief service, and riding the wave of enthusiasm, I was nominated to take over the position. While I was not initially eager to guide the company that had previously done us harm, I was convinced that my hands were safer than someone that could be just as bad if not worse than its predecessors. And now here I am, the new and acting president of the HOA, receiving a generous monthly sum from the HOA from the lawsuit as well. The next story is titled, "Park Here with Your Mustang? Watch It Burn." I have only been told this secondhand, and I barely even remember the incident in question personally. I don't even know if this is supposed to be here anyway, but here goes. A bit of backstory. I used to go to live at the local county fair for the week it ran, Monday through Sunday in the last week of July. I started volunteering young, helping my mom sell race programs for the site and colt stakes out of a stroller. Nothing incites a $1 sale like a 3-year-old offering a brochure for the horse races the first day while sitting in a stroller. Me and my sister helped out with little things, and, in return, we usually got free things, like wristbands for rides, or to get into tractor pulls, or the beloved demolition derby on Sunday. My dad, one of the directors, did, and still does, display old farm equipment in the corner of the grounds, on the other side of the fence from the beer tent. Bonus. Free musical entertainment until 11 p.m. or 1 a.m., depending on whether it was a weekend or weekday. The grounds work double duty every third weekend in August to host the State Woodsman's Field Days, a big logging exhibition and competition. Dad is the tech support, so, again, free admission whenever I might want to go. The parking lot is a little bit difficult to explain. It isn't owned by the Fair Association, but rather some is owned by the nearby school, and the rest is owned by a farmer who lives a half a mile away from the grounds. Years ago, it used to be a dirt road that ran from the school bus garage, along a creek, and then turned a corner to the back by the rear gate by the beer tent, which was also access to the fair office. 2 more small dirt roads converged from the bridge across the creek that was the gate onto the grounds. It was a little triangle area reserved for handicap parking. The road has since been paved, but the lot is still grass. And I can probably tell you the number of entitled Kens and Karens that tried to park there, but this isn't what this story is about. So, fast forward to 2006. I was 16, just got my working papers so I could legally work as a minor, and decided to be a parking attendant during both the fair and Woodsman's. The boss, whom I shall name Hank, not real name, was in charge of the parking attendants, and was both a fair director and Woodsman's volunteer. Each year, we'd go over the rules, and I did this for 7 straight years, before I started working at Wally World. So, to this day, I still have many rules in my head. Don't stand between cars when parking them, no slacking, don't drive other people's cars, use sunscreen and hydrate often, etc., etc. However, one rule was that, at the end of the triangle area reserved for handicap, along the brush line that marked the edge of the creek was reserved for trucks and SUVs, due to the grass being a little bit longer. This is important. Here is where the story begins about the entitled person who I will call Ken, and this was told to us by Hank. Ken had rolled in on one of the fair days with his beautiful, cherry red Ford Mustang, a classic model. At the time, the lot attendants were trying to fill the upper lot, pushing cars towards the farmhouse a half-mile away, but being responsible as it was late in the day. Now, during the fair, we barely have enough cars to make it halfway to the house in each row, so, it was a good 5 minutes max to the gate. One of the attendants had started directing Ken up the hill, but Ken had other ideas. Our lovely Ken had found a good spot for his beloved Mustang, and he'd be damned if he dirty her by going to the lot up the small hill, and instead opted to try for the first open space in the truck and SUV area. Now, I don't know what the conversation was, but I assume it was a back and forth of the attendant at the bottom of the hill, who also has the stressful job of being traffic director, trying to get Ken to the upper lot and explaining why it wasn't a good idea to park where he wanted, and Ken trying to make his case about parking in the truck and SUV zone. Eventually, the attendant had to go back to his duties and Ken swung into the spot along the creek and disappeared onto the grounds. Now, the reason I said earlier that the long grass was important come into play here. Because this particular transition from July to August was particularly hot and dry. And, as some car enthusiasts might be thinking right now, yeah, it was only a matter of time. The hot exhaust system, in a lower clearance vehicle, was in contact with the long, dry, grass, and before long, there was smoke under the nice, cherry red Mustang. And then fire. The fire department was called, but, by the time they got there, the car was fully engulfed in flames. When all was said and done, that beautiful car was reduced to a burnt-out husk, all because Ken decided to park where he wanted. All 7 years I worked with Hank, we were always told this story as a warning. But, leave it to an idiot in a Mustang to make a stupid decision, and win a stupid prize. The next story is entitled Karen Wants Magic Mail Delivery. This story takes place over the past 10 days or so. My wife and I run a small farm, homestead, apothecary, and we sell some of our products on Etsy. 99.5% of the orders go fine. Sometimes there's an issue. And some of that time, it's a Karen. One of the items we sell is a very short book that I wrote to accompany some of our products. Don't get too impressed. It's quite short, self-published, etc. But it's a good companion at our farmers market booths, etc. About 10 days ago I was sitting at my desk and Karen ordered said book. Since all I have to do is grab a copy, stick it in a padded envelope, print a shipping label, and go, I did it on the spot. 3 days later I get an Etsy message saying that the tracking info says her order is delivered but she doesn't have it and the whole thing seemed too quick to be real, or something to that effect. I check the tracking on my side and see the same thing, delivered. I tell her I'm sorry. Ask her if it's possible it was delivered somewhere nearby, and tell her we'll work together to get it right. I also know that sometimes carriers will mark stuff delivered, and then actually deliver it the next day. I get it, they're monitored too. But I thought that might be the case here. I then go out of town for business and proceed to not only get 4 more Etsy messages, but she then opens a support case, not with USPS but with Etsy. Mind you, at this point, I have technically fulfilled my part of things, but I do want to help her. She also said something about checking with roommates, which makes me think of another potential issue. Meanwhile she is still direct messaging me. I'm mostly ignoring it. If I file a claim with the USPS they will tell me she has to do it, so there's really nothing for me to do, and since I'm on a work trip I'm just not dealing with her. But of course, I see every notification on my phone. Well, within 10 minutes of the case being opened, Etsy closed it saying the tracking shows delivered. At this point I decide the $7 I will make from this is not worth it, so I issue a full refund and cancel the order. I also include a note saying that any future orders would be declined and refunded before shipping. Well, that only precipitated more messages, which still got no response. Fortunately, Gmail lets you preview the Etsy chat without showing the user you read it. Then I get the final message. Root cause discovered. Karen, in her flurry of drunken shopping for handmade goodies, had moved and did not update her mailing address on Etsy. So the package went exactly where she told me to send it. Her old house. Thanks, Karen. The last story is titled, Why I Stopped Giving Airplane Rides. I am a pilot and once owned a small 2-place slow and low airplane, Quicksilver. I belonged to a loose-knit flying club that leased a farmer's grass strip private airport. Once a month in the summer, we held a cookout, and I would give rides in my Quicksilver to friends and family. Two separate events resulted in me stopping this practice. Typically, at a cookout, there were people waiting for me to show up and start giving rides. I did not mind and enjoyed sharing my airplane. One time, I had been giving rides for about 2 to 3 hours when I finally finished with the last passenger. As I went over to get some food and drink, the father of one of the kids who went up with me stopped me. He said, "I know it costs a lot to operate an airplane. I only had $10 to put in the donation bucket. I hope it is enough." Now every private pilot knows it is illegal to accept compensation for flying in any form. My replay was, I don't know who put out a donation bucket, but it was not for giving rides. It's illegal for me to accept any compensation, donations or not. I gladly pay for all the expenses and that bucket has nothing to do with me or my airplane. Also note, that when I finished, the donation bucket magically disappeared. There were also a bunch of pissed off people when the word got around, and the bucket never appeared again. Yes, I knew who put it out, and we later had an come to Jesus discussion about it. Yay, he just pocketed the money. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I was giving my pre-flight brief to a young girl who was eager to have her first airplane ride. After showing how the intercom worked, I told her that if she felt sick or got scared, let me know and I will get her back on the ground as quickly as possible. Her dad was standing by her when I said that and he gave me the alpha male stare and said, "You scare her and I will sue you." We kind of had a staring contest, and I then apologized to the girl, saying I would no longer be able to give her a ride. I also put the airplane away, canceling the rest of the rides that day. After that, my airplane always had issues when we had a cookout. Thank you for listening.